Before we begin, I'm not a historian or an expert. I'm just a fan who went digging and wanted to share what I found. Everything in this video comes from information that's freely available in the public domain. Don't take my word for any of it. Look it up, check it, verify it for yourself. History is messy and the sources don't always agree. So please take it all with a pinch of salt. Where the facts are genuinely disputed, I've tried to flag it. And to be clear, this isn't about putting anyone down. Not a person, not a race, not a legacy. It's about giving credit where it's long overdue and putting the right names back in the story. That's the whole point. So let's get into it. Let me tell you about the loneliest record in the universe. Right now, at this moment, about 15 billion miles from your couch, there's a gold record flying through the space. NASA bolted it on the Voyager probe back in 1977 and it launched it into the dark. A little hello for any aliens who might find us one day. And you might ask, what's on it? Well, it has a human heartbeat, people saying hi in 55 languages and just one rock and roll song. Out of every other song we have ever recorded, we picked exactly one to speak for the whole human race. A black man from St. Louis. And here's the gut punch. At the exact moment his songs were playing on every radio in America, he still could not check into a hotel in half the country. Good enough to represent our whole species to the stars, but not good enough for a room for the night. That gap right there between the people who made this music and the people who got to own it, that's the real story of how rock and roll was really born. And trust me, it's a much better story than whatever you got in school or from your friends. It takes 30 years. It starts at a dirt crossroad in Mississippi and it ends on a TV stage in New York City. Come with me. I want you to meet the people who got it erased. So, Mississippi in 1930s. Picture flat cotton fields running clear to the horizon. Some of the poorest land in America. And the people picking that cotton are mostly black. A generation or two out of slavery. Working fields they'll never get to own a single inch of. And at night, dead tired, let's sit on the porches and crowd into little juke joints and make music out of the only thing they had. A beat up guitar, a voice, and the truth about their lives. That's blues. And I need you to get this part. The blues wasn't for fun. It was for surviving. 3 chords and a note bent until the guitar literally sounded like a person crying. One line calls out, the guitar answers back. Even alone in a room, something answered you back. Now 2 names to hang on to. Son House, a preacher who could not stay away from the bottle to save his life. And you can hear that whole war in every note he played. And a skinny kid who used to stand right in front and just watch him. His name? Robert Johnson. You probably heard the legend, Midnight a Crossroad. Johnson hands his guitar to the devil. The devil tunes it and hands it back. And suddenly, the kid plays like God. People still argue about which crossroad it was. Well, here's what actually happened. And honestly, it's a better story. Son House, he knew young Robert and he said the kid was terrible. Fine on harmonica, but hand him a guitar and grown man would beg him to stop. Then Robert vanished, gone for about a year. And when he walked back into the town and started to play, Son House said it was almost frightening. The kid had gotten that good, that fast. He was just a young man who disappeared and practiced like his life depended on it. He got so good so quickly that nobody could really explain any other way except he must have sold his soul. That's how good he was. He only ever recorded twice. Once in San Antonio in 1936 and once in Dallas in 37. There's even a story that he was so shy or so protective of his little tricks that he cut some of those songs facing the corner of the room, his back to everyone. He wrote exactly 29 songs. That's his entire catalog. That's it. By 1938, he was dead, 27 years old. And here's the part that really gets me. Nobody actually knows how he died. The famous version says a jealous husband slipped poison into his whiskey. But that whole story basically traces back to one guy. However, his death certificate says something completely different. And there was never an autopsy. So the most important bluesman who ever lived left us 29 songs and a mystery we can't really crack. But those songs, they didn't die with him. They got passed hand on hand. Record to scratched up record. All the way forward. They're the DNA for everything that comes next. For the blues to turn into rock, 2 things have to happen. A, it has to move, and B, it has to plug in. The moving comes first. Millions of black families pack up and leave the South, chasing real wages in factory cities like Chicago and Detroit. Historians call it the Great Migration, and they carry the blues north in their suitcases. But the city has a problem that Delta never had. Try playing a soft acoustic guitar in a packed Chicago bar on a Saturday night. Nobody can hear a thing over the crowd. So the blues does the single most important thing it will ever ever do. It grabs an amplifier. The guy at the center of this is Muddy Waters. He grew up on a Mississippi plantation, and his blues was so pure that a folklorist showed up in 1941 and recorded him, basically thinking, let me capture this old thing before it vanishes forever. And there's a beautiful moment. They play the recording back and Muddy hears his own voice for the first time in his life and thinks, wait a second, I'm actually good. I can really do this. And 2 years later, he's in Chicago, he plugs in, and the amplifier just doesn't make him louder. It gives blues muscles. It gives blues attitude. A little bit of menace. That electric swagger, that's the thing we're going to end up calling rock and roll. He signs to a label called Chess Records, run by two immigrant brothers, and starts cutting songs that a bunch of British teenagers are going to memorize note to note 20 years down the road. Hang on to that. Now, while all the men are busy plugging into the blues, somebody's already miles ahead of them, and the music businessman nearly erased her completely. Her name is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She came out of the Pentecostal church, so gospel, but loud, sweaty, electric gospel. She strapped on a solid body electric guitar and played it with a fire nobody expected from a woman. In 1944, she cut a record called Strange Things Happening Every Day. Do me a favor, pause this tonight and go listen to that record. There's a guitar solo in there that sounds exactly like Chuck Berry, more than 10 years before Chuck Berry. Serious music. People often call this as first rock and roll record ever. And when I say this, believe me, they're not joking. And check this out. In 1947, a teenage kid walks up to her before a show in Macon and sings her one of her own songs. She's so impressed, she pulls him on stage with her and slips him a little cash afterwards. It was that boy's very first time ever performing out of the church. That boy, he grew up to be Little Richard. She literally handed him the stage. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, they all grew up on Sister Rosetta. She was the blueprint. And then she spent the next 50 years getting quietly deleted from the story. Partly because a black woman shredding a Gibson doesn't really fit the picture the industry wanted to sell. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they didn't let her in until 2018, 45 years after she died. We're not doing that here. She goes right up front. Okay, so when does the blues officially become rock and roll? Well, there's no birth date, but there's one record everybody points out at. Rocket 88, cut in Memphis in 1951 by Ike Turner's band. It's got the beat, the shout, this nasty first out distorted guitar tone. And here's how they supposedly got that tone. On the drive back to the studio, the guitar amp, it kind of fell off the car and busted the speaker. So they stuffed it with paper to hold it together. Plugged it anyway, and that broken buzz, it turned out to sound incredible. The signature sound of rock guitar might have been a complete accident. I'm not claiming it, I'm saying what I think. A busted speaker and some weighted up paper. Even the name rock and roll was a marketing move. Rocking and rolling had floated around black music for years. Sometimes it meant dancing, and well, sometimes it meant something a lot spicier than dancing. A Cleveland radio DJ named Alan Freed, he started spinning this music for young listeners and slapped a fresh label on it, rock and roll. New name, history scrubbed off, nice and safe to sell to white teenagers. And more importantly, to their nervous parents. Keep your eye on that trick because it is the engine of the whole story. The music is black, and at every single step, somebody repackages it to sell to the white America. Which brings us to a tiny studio in Memphis and a producer named Sam Phillips. Now, Phillips actually loved this music. He recorded black artists like Howlin Wolf and Ike Turner because he genuinely thought they were incredible. But he also understood exactly what country he was living in. Radio was segregated, white kids were desperate for this sound, but they weren't really allowed to buy it from the people making it. And Phillips is famous, really infamous for one line. He supposedly said that if we could ever find a white man with a black sound and a black feel, he could make $1 billion. People who were in the room say he said it more than once, kind of half joking to his assistant, but years later, he hated that quote, whatever he meant by it. One night in July 1954, it walked right through his door. A shy 19-year-old truck driver had been hanging around the studio. During a break, the kid gets bored, grabs his guitar and starts goofing off, bouncing around the room, singing an old blues song called That's Alright. The band jumps in, everybody just messes around. Sam Phillips takes his head out of the control room. And he said, "What are you doing?" The kid goes, "I don't know." And Philip says, "Well, pack it up and do it again." He hit record. The kid's name was Elvis Presley. And let me be very fair to Elvis, because the internet usually isn't. He wasn't some scam artist. He grew up dirt poor, soaked in gospel and blues. And he had something genuinely electric. The voice, the instinct, those hips that made the parents lose their minds and made everybody else lose their minds in the opposite direction. The talent was real. But look at the pattern. His first single, a cover for blues song Hound Dog. A couple of years later, already a hit for a black woman named Big Mama Thornton before Elvis ever touched it. Elvis was absolutely brilliant at one thing, delivering black music to the white audience that refused to buy it from black artists. And here's the thing, he knew it. At the height of his fame, a reporter asked him about it. And Elvis reportedly basically says, "Look, black musicians were playing this music for years before I came along, and nobody would give them time of the day." That's not me twisting his words. That's the biggest star on the planet on the record admitting it loud. Elvis was a door white America was finally willing to walk through. The tragedy isn't that he walked through it. It's who got left standing outside, uncredited and unpaid. Because the industry had a neat little machine for exactly like this. A black artist, he puts out a hit, Little Richard, Fats Domino, and the label grabs a clean-cut white singer, usually a guy named Pat Boone, to re-record the same song, but softer, safer, blander. And Boone's watered-down version gets a radio play and outsells the original. And the people who wrote it, they got to sit and watch it become a smash in somebody else's mouth. That wasn't a bug in the system. That was a system. So let's give the real architects their due, because they built this entire thing and barely got any credit. So let's start with Chuck Berry. If one single human being who invented the rock songs as we know it, it's this man. He took the blues, hit the gas, and bolted together three things nobody had put in the same place before. A guitar riff so catchy you'd know it in two notes. A story you could actually follow and sing along to. And the showmanship to sell to the entire package. Johnny B. Good isn't just a song. It's the first ever rock star origin story, written by a guy who was living it in real time. And Chuck was honest about it. That legendary opening riff, he started up admitting he lifted the idea from a jazz guitarist named Carl Hogan. He took an old swing lick, sharpened the edges, cranked it through the amp, and turned this into the sound for a teenager kicking the open door. 60 years later, every guitar player on the earth is still quoting him, and most of them don't even know it. And then there's Little Richard. Remember the kid Rosetta pulled on stage? If Barry drew the blueprint, Richard was the raw electricity running through the walls. Tutti Frutti 1955, pounding piano, that air raid siren scream, pure joy with a live wire underneath it. Every wild frontman who has ever lived owes this man money. Prince, Freddie Mercury, Bowie, all of them. He was the queer black man being the loudest, most flamboyant human being in the 1950s of America. And then almost overnight, the whole generation gets wiped off the board. Watch how fast this happens. 1957, Little Richard is on a plane over Australia. An engine looks like it's on fire, and he becomes convinced that God is telling him to knock it off. And the way he tells the story, he pulled the rings off his fingers, threw them into the harbor, quit Rockhold, and became a preacher. 1958, Elvis gets drafted into the army. That same year, Jerry Lee Lewis blows up his entire career overnight when the press finds out he's married his 13-year-old cousin. 1959, Chuck Berry gets tangled in a legal case that will eventually put him into the prison. And on a freezing night that February, a small plane goes down in a field outside Clear Lake, Iowa, and kills Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and Big Bopper. The night a song would later call the day music died. In about 2 years, rock loses nearly everyone who built it. The charts fill up with stuff that's smoother, whiter, and safer. And from the outside, it looks like the whole thing was just a 5-year fad that finally fizzled out. But the records didn't die. The records got on ship. Those American blues and R&B singles wash up in Britain. Grey, broke, rationed, post-war Britain. And a generation of British teenagers get hold of them like smuggled treasure. They trade them, they copy them, they play them until the groove veers flat. And here's the key, the thing that changes everything. These British kids don't carry American baggage. Nobody has ever told them this was low-class badass music made by people they were supposed to look down on. They just heard the greatest sound on the planet Earth and decided, I'm going to learn to play that if it kills me. Let me give you my favorite moment in this entire story. October of 1961, a train platform in a town called Dartford, just outside of London. Two kids who'd known each other as little boys, they bump into each other. One of them is carrying a stack of imported records under his arm, Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters. And the other kid spots him and basically goes, wait, you're into this stuff too? Those two kids were Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. And when they needed a name for their band, they looked down at Muddy Waters' record lying on the floor. One of the songs' title was Rolling Stone. The Rolling Stones. They named after a Chicago blues song by a couple of English teenagers. Meanwhile, up in Liverpool, four other kids are grinding it out in filthy all-night clubs over in Hamburg, playing Chuck Berry and Little Richard covers for hours on end until they're the tightest band in Europe. You know, those guys do pretty well too. And it's happening everywhere in Britain. The Yardbirds, the Animals, the young players about to build Led Zeppelin. All of them raised on American blues records. All of them about to sell that sound straight back into the country that threw it into the trash. February 9th, 1964. This is where the circle snaps shut. The Beatles, they walk out onto the Ed Sullivan stage in New York. 73 million Americans are watching. That's roughly 6 out of every 10 TVs that was switched on in the entire country, all tuned onto one show. It's the starting gun for the British invasion. And within months, the British bands, they owned the American charts. And you know what? Here's the irony. The actual point of this entire thing, that music invading America in 1964, it got stripped away of mop haircuts and English accents. And it's the exact same delta in Chicago blues that America built and then spent 30 years refusing to take it seriously. The country finally fell head over heels over its own music. It just needed to hear it in a British accent first. And I love this. A lot of those British kids knew exactly where it all came from. And some of them flat out refused to hide it. Best example, 1965, the Rolling Stones get invited onto this big American TV show called Shindig, if I'm not wrong. And they say, yes, on one condition, they'll only come if the producers also book one of their heroes, Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf. Wolf, he gets the slot. And so millions of young white Americans flip on their TVs and watch this towering Chicago bluesman, Howlin' Wolf, absolutely tear the roof off with how many more years, while the Rolling Stones sit on the floor at his feet like a bunch of students. For about 3 minutes, the people who actually built this music are standing right there in plain sight, inside the house they built. So, next time when somebody tells you it all started with Elvis or the Beatles, you'll know they're just naming the big city the river runs through, not the spring it actually came from. And the spring has names: Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf. Learn those names, say them out loud. It is honestly the least we owe them. This is where everything on this channel begins. Every band, every genre, every story I'm going to tell you, all of it flows out of those 30 years. So subscribe and come with me through the rest of it. And do me one favor, tell me in the comments honestly how many of those names did you really have to look up. I mean, don't be embarrassed. That's the whole reason we are here. I've also learned them over a period of time. I didn't know them before. So next time we go all the way back to the beginning, the blues and the young man who supposedly met a devil at the crossroads. I'll see you there. Until then, Fink Speaks, signing off.